What if one sentence, one angry outburst, erased your entire country from your life? They gave him exactly what he asked for. Never hear of America again. But when your home vanishes, what's left? Trapped on a ship where even Shakespeare is censored, Philip Nolan is about to break the one rule that keeps him alive. A Man Without a Country, Part 2. Press like and subscribe. Ask yourself, could you survive without your identity? Welcome to Englisher. Learn by listening. Your daily dose of English listening and learning practice. This content is used strictly for educational purposes to improve your English listening skills. It's also perfect if you're preparing for IELTS, TOEFL, or any language proficiency test. This is part 2 of a multi-part English listening story. Make sure to follow the full series for complete learning. Let's begin today's practice.
The Man Without a Country by Edward Everett Hale. Reading by Roddy Delaney. The plan then adopted was substantially the same as was necessarily followed ever after. Perhaps it was suggested by the necessity of sending him by water from Fort Adams to Orleans. The Secretary of the Navy, it must have been the first Crown and Shield, though he is a man I do not remember, was requested to put Nolan on board a vessel bound on a long cruise, and to direct that he should be only so far confined there as to make it certain that he never saw or heard of the country. We had few cruises then, and the Navy was very much out of favor, and as almost all of this story is traditional, as I have explained, I do not know certainly what his first cruise was. But the commander to whom he was entrusted, perhaps it was Tingey or Shaw, though I think it was one of the younger men, we are all old enough now, regulated the etiquette and the precautions of the affair, and according to his scheme they were carried out, I suppose, till Nolan died. When I was second officer of the Intrepid, some 30 years after, I saw the original paper of instructions. I have been sorry ever since that I did not copy the whole of it. It ran, however, much in this way. Washington, with a date which have been late in 1807. Sir, you will receive from Lieutenant Neal the person of Philip Nolan, late Lieutenant of the United States Army. This person, on his trial by court-martial, expressed with an oath the wish that he might never hear of the United States again. The court has sentenced him to have his wish fulfilled. For the present, the execution of this order is entrusted by the President of this department. You will take the prisoner on board your ship and keep him there with such precautions as shall prevent his escape. You will provide him with such quarters, rations, and clothing as would be proper for an officer of his late rank if he were a passenger on your ship on the business of his government. The gentlemen on board will make any arrangements agreeable to themselves regarding his society. He is to be exposed to no indignity of any kind, nor is he ever to unnecessarily be reminded that he is a prisoner. But under no circumstances is he ever to hear of his country, or see any information regarding it, and you will specially caution all the officers under your command to take care that, in the various indulgences which may be granted, this rule, in which his punishment is involved, shall not be broken. It is the intention of the government that he shall never again see the country which he has disowned. Before the end of your cruise, you will receive orders which will give effect to this intention. Respectfully yours, W. Southard, for the Secretary of the Navy. If I had only preserved the whole of this paper, there would be no break in the beginning of my sketch of this story. For Captain Shaw, if it were he, handed it to his successor in the charge, and he to his, and I suppose the commander of the Levant has it today as his authority for keeping this man in this mild custody. The rule adopted on board the ships on which I have met the Man Without a Country was, I think, transmitted from the beginning. No mess liked to have him permanently, because his presence cut off all talk of home, or of the prospect of return, of politics or letters, of peace or war, cut off more than half the talk men like to have at sea. but it was always thought too hard that he should never meet the rest of us, except to touch hats, and we finally sank into one system. He was not permitted to talk to the men unless an officer was by. With officers he had unrestrained intercourse, as far as they and he chose, but he grew shy, though he had his favorites. I was one. Then the captain always asked him to dinner on Monday. Every mess in succession took up invitation in its turn. According to the size of the ship, you had him at your mess more or less often at dinner. His breakfast he ate in his own stateroom. He always had a stateroom, which was where a sentinel or somebody on watch could see the door. And whatever else he ate or drank alone. Sometimes, when the Marines or sailors had any special jollification, they were permitted to invite Plain Buttons, as they called him. Then Nolan was sent with some officer, and the men were forbidden to speak of home while he was there. I believe the theory that the sight of his punishment did them good. They called him Plain Buttons because, while he chose to wear a regulation army uniform, he was not permitted to wear the army button, for the reason that it bore either the initials or the insignia of the country he had disowned. I remember, soon after I joined the Navy, I was on shore with some of the older officers from our ship and from the Brandywine, which we had met at Alexandria. We had leave to make a party and go up to Cairo and the pyramids. As we jogged along, you went on donkeys then, some of the gentlemen, we called them Dons, but the phrase was long since changed, fell into talking about Nolan, and someone told the system which was adopted from the first about his books and other reading. As he was almost never permitted to go on shore, even though the vessel lay in port for months, his time at best hung heavy, and every one was permitted to lend him books, if they were not published in America and made no allusion to it. These were common enough in the old days, when people in the other hemisphere talked of the United States as little as we do of Paraguay. He had almost all the foreign newspapers that came into the ship sooner or later, only somebody must go over them first and cut out any advertisement or stray paragraph that alluded to America. This was a little cruel sometimes, when the back of what was cut out might be as innocent as Hesiod. Right in the midst of one of Napoleon's battles, or one of Canning's speeches, poor Nolan would find a great hole, because on the back of the page of that paper there had been an advertisement for a packet for New York, or a scrap from the President's message. I say this was the first time I ever heard of this plan, which afterwards I had enough and more than enough to do with. I remember it because poor Phillips, who was a part of that party, as soon as the allusion to reading was made, told a story of something which happened at the Cape of Good Hope on Nolan's first voyage, and it was the only time I knew of that voyage. They had touched at the Cape, and done the civil thing with the English admiral and the fleet, and then, leaving for a long cruise up the Indian Ocean, Phillips had borrowed a lot of English books from an officer, which, in those days, as indeed in these, was quite a windfall. Among them, as the devil would order, was the Lay of the Last Minstrel, which they had all of them heard of, but which most of them had never seen. I think it could not have been published long. Well, nobody thought there could be any risk of anything national in that, though Phillips swore old Shaw had cut out the Tempest from Shakespeare before he let Nolan have it, because he said the Bermudas ought to be ours, and, by Jove, should be one day. So Nolan was permitted to join the circle one afternoon when a lot of them sat on deck smoking and reading aloud. People do not do such things so often now, but when I was young, we got rid of a great deal of time so. Well, so it happened that in his turn Nolan took the book and read to the others, and he read very well, as I know. Nobody in the circle knew a line of the poem, only it was all magic and border chivalry, and was 10,000 years ago. Poor Nolan read steadily through the 5th canto, stopped a minute and drank something, and then began, without a thought of what was coming. Breathes there a man with soul so dead, who never to himself hath said, It seems impossible to us that anybody ever heard this for the first time, but all of these fellows did then, and poor Nolan himself went on, still unconsciously or mechanically. "This is my own, my native land." Then they all saw something was to pay, but he expected to get through, I suppose, turned a little pale, but plunged on. "Whose heart hath ne'er within him burned, as home his footsteps he hath turned, from wandering on a foreign strand? If such there breathe, go, mark him well." By this time the men were all beside themselves, wishing there was any way to make him turn over 2 pages. But he had not quite presence of mind for that. He gagged a little, colored crimson, and staggered on. For him no minstrel raptures swell, high though his titles, proud his name, boundless his wealth, as wish can claim. Despite these titles, power and pelf, the wretch concentrated all in self. And here the poor fellow choked, could not go on, but started up, swung the book into the sea, vanished into his stateroom. And by Jove, said Phillips, we did not see him for 2 months again, and I had to make up some beggarly story to that English surgeon why I did not return his Walter Scott to him.
End of part 2. For part 3 or more parts to follow the playlist. Thank you for listening with Englisher. Learn by listening. All audio used is from LibriVox and is in the public domain. This practice session helps improve your listening comprehension, useful for elites, TOEFL, and other language exams. Like, subscribe, and share if you found this helpful. Comment your favorite word or moment from today's practice. See you in the next one.